record. Okay, thank you.
Oh,
thank you.
Just had a name.
Okay, perfect. So first of all, welcome to this session today, which is, as I see, quite helpful for some of you. Maybe it's a little bit too early, but all of you will come actually to that stage as well. So I would like to welcome you to our webinar today with the title, Ensure How to Prepare for Our Upcoming Viva. And we are lucky enough to have so many our former students with us, actually, who are even luckier because they have passed their Viva, and I guess they will share their experience with us and hopefully be able to answer all our questions, not just the ones we will be asking them as examiners, as Viva committee, but actually all other questions around their feelings, their experience, their being scared before that, and the way how they have prepared for the Viva. So thank you, the four of you. Thank you. And I guess, yeah, Vigi, Carrie, Aloma, and Jim will share their experience quite in detail. So we have to discuss that actually in detail. Don't forget that as many questions coming from you, the better. So try to do that. We are always actually discussing. We are not trying to kind of preach, but just have you actually as the part of our session. So yeah, that's it. If we can go actually to the first slide. Yeah, the first slide is, I guess, quite an interesting one. I hope you do not see and feel like that. So what we are trying to do is, whenever there's a Viva, is not to, how should I say, beat you or hit you or hurt you. It might look like that as it is presented actually in this picture, but don't worry, that's not the idea behind it. The idea is something totally different. And that is what I would like to present now in the next 3 slides. What is actually the view and why do we have actually Viva? So if you can just move to the next one, please. Yeah, so I would try to present 3 slides, how we, the examiners, see actually your Viva. I guess that's the most important part to understand it. So it is not in a way that we would like to, yeah, as I said, hit you, but we would like to help you. If you can move forward, please. Yep, the next one. So as you see, the main idea, the main aim of a Viva is an oral defense, and many times is a public one like today. I guess our 4 candidates will do that in a broader public today. So a defense of your study and your results. And you have to show actually the knowledge and understanding of the research area which you have been actually doing, which you have been actually researching. That's extremely important. We have to understand, we have to know that you have the understanding and you have the knowledge about it. And usually we say you have to have actually even a deeper knowledge than the examiners do, because you have spent 4 years. You are the experts in the area. So we are just trying to touch those areas in order to see whether everything has been done in a, let's say, proper way, and how you see, how you understand it. And definitely what we are really keen to know and to see is actually the contribution to knowledge. So what is the benefit of your thesis? Not just that you have done something, research, which is not beneficial to nobody. That's not kind of the idea behind it. It really should be applicable, especially in your case, and should be actually kind of good guidance for other organizations, companies, and other researchers how to do that. So that's why, and the last thing is actually here is a plagiarism. That's important as well. You know, I don't want to go into the idea into that even deeper, but plagiarism is getting a big problem actually around all the, not just PhDs and DPAs, even all other projects. So it is really important that we know and we see that that has been really your work, that is, you are the authors. And what do we expect from you? It's clear, actually. Next slide, please. we expect actually from you that you, as I mentioned before, understand, interpret, are able to justify why and explain every single detail of your thesis. And that is doing actually through a defense. That means, as we said, is a defense of your thesis. So you are able to, and you are able, I'm totally sure, and that's what maybe a message right now before we even start, you have done it. You know every single word actually you have put into the text. So you are definitely there. You don't have to be scared, never. It is your work. You know everything in detail. So you are definitely able to defend why and what you have been carrying out. You are familiar with the research area. I usually say to my students, now you can go to Viva when I have no additional questions and you know much more than I do. So how can I do? What can I do for you? And that just makes no sense anymore that we go even deeper. You know it in detail. So that's why you are definitely able to defend it. And you have read actually for many, many, many months, some of you even years, the literature. So you know everything about the literature. The tricky thing is maybe sometimes methodology. That's always a little bit a tricky thing because sometimes we see it in a little bit different way. Maybe I would suggest my students to do it in a different way. And that is why we do ask you, we do probe you why you have used exactly this methodology. Why is it beneficial? What would happen if you would, let's say, take something else? So methodology, you should know really a lot and good about that area, because many, many times the questions are coming from there. And then the results, sure, you would have to actually tell what the results are, how you have interpreted them, how are they actually contributing to the knowledge, and what was the discussion about the results. So how you can actually compare your results in the light with other authors in order to share the novelty, in order to share the contribution. The next slide, please, Jack. So, you know, the first slide showed kind of an unpleasant picture, and that is not what we are trying to do. We are definitely not trying to hit you, but as I would like to stress right now, we are trying to help you because we are really, really interested in your work. I would never accept to be an examiner of a thesis I don't want to read. And I enjoy reading a good thesis. And whenever I have read a good thesis, I'm extremely happy for that because I have learned something. You know, and that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to read it in detail. We are trying to learn something from the thesis. And finally, then we have to probe you actually in order to see how much you have kind of learned, and especially that you give us confidence that everything has been your work. So with our questions, we are rather trying to positively and constructively contribute to the quality of your work. And that's the idea behind it, because at the end, when it will be published, it will be out there and it is actually your work. It is your mirror. So we are really trying to add some value to it. And the Viva is for us rather an exciting academic and intellectual discussion. And as we said, not that we would try to search for issues which would kind of show that maybe there are some small details you are not totally confident about. So once again, you have done it, you know everything, and you just go there and enjoy that discussion with your examiners. That's the idea behind it. Yeah, maybe the next slide. And now, let's say all of us who are sitting today in the webinar, but the 4 candidates are forming a committee, a Viva committee. So I would really ask you that we start asking the questions. I have prepared, maybe the next slide, please. I have prepared some of them, but these are just as a guidance for our candidates. But the rest, or maybe additional questions you would like to ask the candidates regarding their thesis, just go ahead and let us have a nice conversation about it. But first of all, usually what we do, I mean, I don't wear a tie but for the Viva, I always have to wear a tie. So I will get ready now because it is an official thing. So you can follow me, wear a tie, and yeah, get ready for the questions. I hope the students are wearing a tie as well. Don't forget that, that's extremely important. You have to make it in an official way. So, as I said, I have prepared a few questions that is I would like to start, but maybe before I start, let us ask our 4 candidates, Vigi, Jim, Aloma, and Kerry, how did they feel before the Viva? Maybe Kerry, can you tell us, how did you feel before the Viva?
So like the morning of the Viva or just generally before?
No, the morning before the Viva.
Oh yeah, I was like very ill, very nervous.
Very ill? Why?
Well, just I had a lot of butterflies, like anticipation. You know, I had to go into, because it was a remote testing environment. So we had technical difficulties and there was a few bumps. And then the university wasn't connecting and they had to like give it 10 minutes. And he had to get the tech support into University of Liverpool. So that start wasn't very comforting. But then as we got into the rhythm and overcame the connection issues, then I settled in and, you know, obviously, you know, you're the expert in the room on what you've written in your research. So okay. That kicked in.
So you were not nervous regarding the questions. You were just nervous regarding the event generally and things like that.
Yes, yeah, just because of the issues, but yeah, it worked out.
Thank you, Kerry. What about you, Jim?
Yeah, the day of, there was a pretty extreme time difference between me and the examiners in the UK. I live in Singapore, so for them it was morning time. For me, it was the afternoon, which actually ended up being a good thing because I basically just dedicated the day to sort of preparing my mind and getting ready for the unknown. Now, full disclosure, I had spent prior to this, and by the way, I just passed back in March, on March 23rd, but I had spent 8 weeks with Boštjan preparing. So I felt like I had heard a lot of really tough questions. He had really helped me to prepare for the unexpected. And so on the day there were nerves, but I really just I read my thesis, kind of skimmed over it, looked at some of the key points in it, and that action just sort of helped calm me down a bit. And by the afternoon, I felt like, okay, I can't wait to get started. I'm ready to get going. And at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Singapore time, is when we kicked off.
So once again, you are not nervous because of, let's say, potential questions or knowledge or whatever it is. That was not the case.
It was always, I think it's always in the back of your mind, but the preparation that you do and the familiarity you have with your topic and the write-up itself, and you know, as long as you are familiar with that and you can navigate that with ease. In hindsight, I don't think there are that many questions that would come up that you couldn't have a dialogue with the examiners about, and that's what they're looking for, is a dialogue.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to hear in a way. Okay, yeah, I mean, we had really a nice sessions. Also not a nice, but many nice sessions. I agree with that. So yeah, we were confident. I guess you were confident. I was confident about your actually knowledge and everything. What about you, Vigi? What about your morning before the Viva? A normal breakfast, a normal coffee, a normal chat with your whoever it was coffee, around or not?
Yes, a normal coffee, of course, because I think that's what made it easier to deal with the day. But I think I was a little on the edge the night before, but not so much in the morning. So it was not, you know, I know people say you have to sleep well on that night, but then no, I wasn't able to. Every time my head touched the pillow, there was a point that came up and I'm like, oh, I got to check that once, I had that feeling. But on the day, I was pretty calm because when I got up in the morning, or I think it was just before I got that little wink of sleep, I said, you've done everything, you know what you've done, and it is what it is. You've submitted your thesis, and you just have to deal and answer the questions that are going to be asked. So I was pretty normal on the day. Yes.
Okay, cool. So it's a normal day of
yes,
a big game.
Yes.
You're nervous
I
before
went
the
through
game.
all the normal routine. I went through all the normal routine. I didn't change anything. And the time of my thesis was good. They started at my time, 10:30 in the morning. So it was perfect. I went through the usual routine in a very, smooth way. Yeah. And I just got everybody out of my way so that, there wouldn't be interruptions or anything to deal with. No phone calls. Yeah.
Okay. So that's actually the message coming from you. Don't be nervous. I mean, you have to be nervous always before the game, before the Viva.
Yeah.
That's actually kind of really good. I mean, that's how it goes. But you don't have to be scared of it. That's, I guess, an important message because you know it. You have done it. So, Aloma, I don't know how you will comment on that, but I hope those three experiences will help you as well. Or would you like to comment on how do you feel before the Viva? Because you haven't done it yet. Aloma, are you still with us? We cannot hear you.
I don't think she's online.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, right. I'm pretty nervous about it, of course, about the upcoming Viva. Even though how much I am prepared, I'm very worried how much I will forget at the time of the questions.
See, once again,
you are prepared yourself, but your nervousness, your tensions, I'm worried that how much I will forget.
Oh, when the lights go on, you will not forget anything. When the lights go on, you just start, thinking and everything's there, and you will just know everything about it, and you know it.
I read my thesis, I'm preparing some questions. I can see I have prepared for all these.
That's it.
Yeah, that's the thing. So I'm confident with the questions, examples, but let me face it.
See, I mean, all the questions which are out there, even on our page, much more cannot come. If you are confident with those questions, then actually not much can come. Don't worry about it. So then another question, maybe for you, Viji, how did you feel after the Viva?
After the Viva, it was again a sense of relief because they told me immediately after the Viva that I had passed the Viva, though I had major modifications. But while the Viva was going on, I anticipated what was coming because of the discussions that we had, the way I had clarified everything, the questions that they had asked. My internal examiner and external examiner had a very friendly approach throughout the Viva. So, and my internal examiner had clarified that this is, even though you're defending your thesis, it's not a defense, but it's more of a dialogue, as Jim pointed out earlier. So they said, feel free to say what you want to and ask questions if you don't understand. So kind of as I went through the thesis, I knew where my written thesis had fallen short of in terms of the expectations of University of Liverpool. So I was kind of aware of the outcome and I said, okay, fine. But the relief was because I was worried, oh, is this going to be another Viva? And they said, no, you have passed. It was a very big relief. I'm like, okay, thank God.
So relief, you mentioned relief.
Yeah.
But were you happy with your performance?
Very, actually, I was. Yes.
Okay.
I was happy with my performance. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Carrie? Were you happy with your performance?
Yes, I think absolutely. I was very elated after it. I felt excellent, was very confident. And I think it goes down to the prep that I had with the coaches previously. So you got into that game, you know, and then afterwards it was just the relief. So preparation was key.
So you want to say that the preparation with your coaches was the key?
With the DoctorateHub.
Really?
Yeah, with Andreas, yeah.
So what without the preparation, wouldn't go that well?
Well, I think the preparation was important, because understanding how to, like courses like you're offering now, understanding what the key points are, what the examiners are looking for, and getting all of that information ready was very instrumental in the success of my Viva.
Okay. And relief as well.
Absolute relief, yes.
Okay, thank you. So the tension was high. What about you, Jim? What about you, Jim?
Yeah,
relief or something else?
Relief and a little bit of adrenaline rush for sure, right at the very end. And just, you know, it was really the end when they came back after their deliberation. You know, you're sort of left alone. In my case, it was in a Zoom room, and you got 15 minutes or so to think, what are they talking about? What are they saying? And you have this feeling that it went well, but there are always things that you look at that you say, well, I could have done that better or answered that differently. But when they come back and tell you you've passed, it is just an amazing feeling. And at that time, and probably several days after, I reflected on the coaching and the preparation aspect of it. And just picking up on something that you were alluding to related to sporting, you know, there's sports. There's a saying in sports, you need to practice like you want to play. And that's where I think coaching and preparation and putting yourselves in really difficult, uncomfortable situations before the Viva are so important, because if you really stretch yourself in the preparation, it means it's very unlikely that you're going to encounter anything more difficult in the live Viva if you do a really strong mock Viva.
Okay, I partly agree with that analogy to sports. I do agree with that. But what I was, should I say something now, or I don't want to be unpleasant once again, but you know me, I try to be that. Anyway, has somebody thought what's next step after the Viva? You know, just not, okay, I have passed. Most of you knew, as you said, your performance was okay, so you were not expecting really something unpleasant. But have you thought, what will I do next? What's the next stage? What's the next step? Or was it just a relief? Or was it another excitement for the future? That goes to the three of you.
I guess, go ahead, sorry.
So, knowing that I had a major modification, of course, the initial relief, having got the information that there's going to be no other Viva and I've passed, it was great. But knowing that I had a major modification, I didn't go back to it within the next 2 days, but I did go back to kind of reviewing, writing down the questions, and thinking about what the next steps are. How do I approach how it has gone? Because I was supposed to get the detailed feedback, and the examiners did mention that they would send it to us in, you know, through an email, and it would be very detailed on what needs to be done. So I sort of kind of started preparing for that mentally, so, more mentally than on, you know, I didn't do any writing or reading at that point, but I mentally prepared myself for what was coming.
But that means just for the revision and not the stage. Okay. Yeah. So has somebody thought a little bit farther on in the future, not just about the revision? That was kind of my question.
So I was going to mention that during the feedback portion, of my Viva, where I already knew I had passed, and I was fortunate enough to have minor modifications. So I already knew what the few modifications were that I needed to make, and the examiners began to discuss publishing with me at that point. And so they were, in a kind way, they were sort of pressuring me at that point to say, commit to doing something with this, commit to doing something else. And one of the examiners actually was an editor of a journal, and so scheduled a follow-up around really working around what are the next steps and helping me to map that out. What are the detailed steps that need to be taken?
Okay. Carrie, what were your thoughts just after?
Yeah, just after. Obviously, I already had the intention to get published and to find out the next step, because that's just my nature. It's, you finish your master's, it was like, right, what's the next challenge? Okay, do the doctorate, what's the next challenge? So working towards understanding how to apply all of the knowledge that I used within my own organization, and also then to continue and use my well-loved research for other purposes.
Okay, thank you. So another message would be probably, don't be scared of the Viva. You know everything. Perform well, train well, and afterwards start thinking how you will disseminate actually your results. So focus on that after that, because that's important, I guess, as well. I mean, passing a Viva and having your DBA in your pocket, that's important, but you should share your knowledge actually with the audience, with a wider, broader audience. So that's then the next step. Okay, I will not start now to push you even further. But what I would like to do now is actually, that we go to the questions we have prepared, or the now doctors have actually experienced, and let us just get the flavor of that, how they were actually answering to the questions of the examiners. And then let us analyze them, and maybe, as I said, you as the audience, you can always jump in and ask additional questions, whatever you want to. Okay, just let us do that. So let us start with Viji. And that is many, many times kind of an opening question. Can we start with your Viva by summarizing your thesis, please?
So the approach that I adopted for that question, as you mentioned, yes, that was the first question that came up. Not in my Viva, that was not the first question that came up. It was the second question. And I approached it by kind of summarizing the chapters that I had in my thesis. So I started with the fact that, yes, I had studied the problem of performance management within a manufacturing environment. My study was an action research study that addressed the problem of performance management through the lens of reviewing the 11 elements.
Can we please shorten that? Can you just summarize your thesis, please?
My action research study comprised of studying performance management within a manufacturing environment through the lens of 11 elements: smart goal setting, engagement, training, leadership, and as I would say, oh my God, I'm missing the 11 elements, right? So feedback, HR system integration, collaborative shared goal setting, coaching, and mentoring. So this is what my action research study consisted of.
What about the results?
In the end, I came out with a framework that helped in the implementation of real-time performance management system within a manufacturing unit.
Okay, thank you. So usually what we do, we expect actually in 2 minutes to get a nice overview of what you have done. The methodology was not there in a way, if I can comment on that. And then the results and kind of the novelty as well. So that's how we usually do that. So that's a typical.
Can I ask a question?
Okay, go ahead.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
Because if I got it right from other persons who have completed their Viva, you have 5 minutes for the summarizing thesis, and you have approximately 2 minutes for the rest of the question. 2 minutes. Am I right?
Yes.
So because I can't summarize some thesis in 2 minutes. I can't do that.
No, it's 2 minutes is quite a time. It's not as short as it is, but it is quite a time to summarize. And the approach is more dialogic in nature, so it should not be a problem. But they do let you talk about what you have done. And I did that. I actually did all my chapters. I mentioned in my actual Viva, I mentioned that I had followed a mixed methodology, a pragmatic approach, and even the final conclusion. So they do give you 2 minutes to talk about it. Yes.
See, Aloma, and I mean, it's in a way, different, I would say, from committee to committee. Some of them let you talk a little bit more and wider and broader. Some of them really want to have it tack, 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 tack. So it depends. But you see that actually after the first and second question, if they're unpleasant like I was, I cut in actually and said, can you just do it actually fast? Don't talk too much around. I mean, that was kind of a sign. Let us finish it as soon as possible and give me a clear and precise answer, and that's it. No discussion about it. Okay, so that is what I did on purpose, kind of, to VG right now, just to show that if your examiners react that way, then you get actually a feeling how you should reply. Not just this question, but even the other questions. If they're really kind of dialogue and more, discussion and talking about, then you can talk a bit longer. Okay, thank you, Vijay. The next question would be for you, Jim. About the literature, kind of. Where does your work fit into the literature?
Yes. So in terms of answering, I'll answer that question directly and then kind of share something that I did, or maybe let me do that right now. I had a conceptual framework of my my study in the thesis write-up. And at this point, when this question came up, and it did, I referred the examiners to that conceptual framework, and it allowed us to walk through the way that the work fit into the literature. So the way that I answered this was my study was informed by a particular gap that I had observed in practice in B2B selling. And that first led me to the B2B sales and marketing literature. So that was really a foundational element of the literature that that informed the study. The exploration of that further led me to discover and examine and go deep into what's called service dominant logic, which is a key area of the literature that informs the study. And within service dominant logic, there's a pretty clear linkage to identity theory and identity work. And that further led me to explore and study in the literature structuration theory, which is a sub-theory of identity theory. And over the time that I worked in the literature and explored it, I started to see these linkages form up between my gap in practice in B2B selling that I was observing, what I was seeing and studying in B2B marketing theory, how that linked to service dominant logic, and how that was further supported by the use of structuration theory as a way to understand on a human level what might be going on in the gap that I was observing related to B2B selling. So these were the three key areas of the literature that informed the work: B2B marketing theory, service dominant logic, and structuration theory.
What about the authors who were important for you?
Yeah, within the authors, with the examiners, I've discussed some of the key authors such as Riles and Rackham in B2B marketing theory. In service dominant logic, Vargo and Lush are the key authors that I worked with there. And then in structuration theory, there are a variety of authors that have worked within structuration theory. So we explored each one of those. We didn't really go too deep in terms of the authors, but one of my examiners was, his area of expertise was in marketing. And in fact, I actually referenced him in my thesis. So we kind of went down a path and explored an area of interest for him. The other examiner, her expertise was in action research. And so we, in identity work, spent some time kind of exploring her area of interest there.
Okay. So another question which could come up is for you, Jim. Why is this topic important? I mean, you have to justify that, definitely, the literature review. And to whom is it relevant? That is then rather practice. So that's a question which kind of, touches two different areas. First, justification, and then, why actually and to whom?
Yeah, so this question came up really early in my Viva, and the way I laid it out, it was almost like a summary of the thesis. But my explanation of this was there are millions of sales engineers. This was the role that I was studying in B2B selling. There are millions of sales engineers. They're directly impacting more than $10 trillion of commerce each and every year. This role requires a very unique skill set, a very unique professional identity, and yet the role is really underrepresented in the literature. And on top of that, practically, managers of B2B sales organizations find it very difficult to locate and develop and retain these sales engineers. So it's a key challenge that they have in supporting and growing their business. So who this matters to from an academic perspective, because there's such a significant gap in the literature in B2B selling or B2B sales and marketing literature, this will represent a contribution there. Because this is a study that will also contribute to a practical example of how service dominant logic is implemented in organizations, there's a contribution there. So it matters to scholars in that area. And because this is a focus on professional identity development, it matters to those scholars. But practically speaking, in business, if we can conceptualize this role, if we can more reliably turn out efficient and excellent sales engineers, that matters to practitioners as well.
Okay, committee members, are you happy with this answer? Would you expect something else?
I like the answer because it showed a lot of reflections from different sides. It gave me perspectives. I could see that the answer were placed against the literature as well as against the application area. So it was a very balanced response, which, like the response before, put me very much at ease. The tactic at the response before, or the communication style, was, while it was longer than 2 minutes, actually the answer was comprised of like 10 different sentences, and each sentence in itself was closed. So I was taken in a sequence further, which allowed me to really nicely follow Jim. But obviously, this is also a matter of communication and whether or not you're a good communicator or trained on how to communicate, which certainly will come into Jim's favor at this point.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Any other observations so far? Everybody's happy with the answers so far. Okay, so maybe the next question, which is, I guess, quite a common one as well, because we always have to kind of link, the title with the problem, and then with the research question, and methodology, and then the results, and finally discussion conclusions. So that would be definitely a common question. For you, Vijay, please, how are the research problem and the research question linked?
The research, I had 5 research questions within my study, and they helped me understand the what, the where, the why, the how many, and the how much, and helped me review the outcomes that were important for the study. The first research question helped me in assessing the main issues that were impacting effective implementation of performance management. And the second one was focused on the key elements, on identifying what the key elements are that influence performance management. The third research question studied the 11 elements within the framework of performance management. And the fourth and fifth were actually sequential in nature because they put the perspective of real-time performance management on as an influence factor within employees' assessment and led to a sequential framework for implementation. What I had also done within my thesis was create a table that gives an alignment between research questions, the attributes that are being reviewed in relation to the problem, and the methodology used for each research question, which helped communicate to the examiners and to the readers how they were related.
Okay, but I mean, having 5 research questions is quite a lot. It's kind of unusual. Usually we go with 1 or 2, and 3 is even, I mean, you know, because it makes it extremely broad. Because theoretically, the research question guides the whole study. So theoretically, somebody could even say there are kind of almost 3 or 4 studies in there. But still, I'm kind of not really happy with your reply right now, because the question was how the problem and the research questions are related, linked. So that would mean that you had at least 5 problems, or what?
Yes, I did. I studied the problem from 5 perspectives. So the elements, the issue, the elements, and then the implementable framework. I had 3 action research cycles, which led to the analysis of the problem.
Were there 5 problems as well or not?
Yes, they were.
Okay. I mean, yeah, okay. Were you happy with the answer, guys? Did you?
My assumption is that there will be an overarching issue, at least from Vichy's first response. It sounded that there is something gluing the study together, and that those 5 problem areas are not unrelated. Vichy, could you shed some light on that?
They're not unrelated. Yes, they're not unrelated. So each question led to the other. So where I had the first question, the problem identification, it brought out the elements. And so that there was a research question on why the elements are important. And that led me to the analysis of the real-time performance management. When I started the study, I started with 3 questions. But as I worked through the second action cycle, the framework developed. And it came out through literature review and through the study, which is why there were 2 more questions that I added on in the middle stage, and it led me to the 3rd cycle of action research.
And I think this here is a very critical understanding in here, and where communication can go wrong. As Vichy just said, it was an iterative process. And this is actually common to any type of research, as obviously, as more you engage in the research, as deeper gets your knowledge, and as further the questions mature. Nevertheless, there will have been an initial starting question that obviously evolved. So instead of rather seeing a study that explored 5 questions, at the end of the day, it was a study that had a starting question, and then there were sub-questions that were emerging as the study continued. And I think if expressed in that way in the Viva, but also in the thesis, that would clarify and simplify things very much for the examiners, because it would show them, okay, so there was one initial research question and that was in-depth explored further. If it's presented in a different way, that might cause questions, what has been done. So I think it's important to work it out in that way that it can be easiest understood. So that would be my comment on that.
Yeah,
if I can just add a point to that, is because University of Liverpool has an action research model, and they are open. Like, the whole idea of using a pragmatic approach was not to limit the research problem, but to explore it as much as I could, and to come out with an implementable solution if possible. So as it opened up, yes, given the iterative cycles that I followed, there was a need that, yes, I do add to the research questions, because I was assessing something which was, subsequently followed on with implementation and review, and another implementation and review.
Okay, so as I mentioned, that's something else. 5 research questions is really, really a lot, because usually a research question is linked to a methodology. And with 5 research questions, you might have an issue that you are using just one methodology. So that, as I said, and even that you start and add actually additional questions while you are researching, that's another question which should be answered probably then in detail. I would, as an examiner, definitely go into that and grill you a little bit in this area. Not you, actually. I would grill probably your supervisor, but that's something else. That's why we will not do that. But yeah, so 5 research questions is extremely a lot. And especially with questions like why, it's another thing which is kind of a little bit tricky, or might be tricky. Okay. Thanks. So Jim, maybe for you a question. Your methodology was quite interesting and quite unique. So definitely the question has to come. Why did you use exactly this research methodology?
Yeah, this was an area that we spent a lot of time on in the Viva. Not too much time, but the way that I approached this question and this answer, I referred to a graphic that I had in my thesis write-up that showed the interplay of essentially 2 methodologies that I was using. Phenomenology, specifically hermeneutic phenomenology, as a means of gathering data or extracting data through observation and through engagement with my participants. And then, of course, action research. And specifically the approach to phenomenology, I went back to the literature with my examiners and said, the way that I came to this was approaching my problem and approaching the literature review with an open mind in terms of the right fit of methodology that will be most appropriate and most effective in this study. And what I began to notice in the literature was this constant interplay between my problem and the things that I was researching and reading in the literature, and how that was beginning to link back to a pretty consistent set of methodologies that had been used in previous studies, specifically phenomenology. And over time, as the research questions were further shaped by the literature review, and I began to see this pattern essentially of phenomenology being something that was very useful in the type of study that I was going to undertake, that's how I came to hermeneutic phenomenology as a research methodology to gather data. And that was strengthened by reading authors like Moustakas, Aldessen and Skolberg, Van Manen, specifically looking at the phenomenology of practice in professional settings and trying to understand the experiences of professionals in their roles. And then looking at 2 of the key pillars in my literature review, specifically structuration theory and service dominant logic, researchers in those areas had a very consistent preference for phenomenology. So these things all started to line up. The last thing related to that was, since I was approaching my subject as effectively an insider, there was the risk that my own experience, my potential bias, could create problems as I approach the topic. And there are methods and approaches in the application of hermeneutic phenomenology that allow for that to essentially contribute to the research as opposed to detract from the research. And so that was another reason that I came to that particular methodology.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions, committee?
Yes, if you are explaining this this question is for Jim. Why did you exactly use this research methodology? Are we expected to say that we considered other methodologies as well before we settled on action research, or should we just stop at that?
I can give you my experience that my examiners did ask me why didn't I consider other specific methodologies. And so they did expect me to show that I had explored other methodologies and that I hadn't just gone down the phenomenology, the path of phenomenology without looking at other areas. In fact, at one point I said, I actually considered whether or not I could do a quantitative study, and they both groaned. They both groaned and said, "Oh no, please don't do that," because they both had a bias toward qualitative.
So, but so the end is I couldn't get you properly. So should I still explain why I didn't use other methodologies, or just explain my methodology?
Well, it's kind of a process of elimination, because you're saying if you're open to other methodologies, that implies you've eliminated those methodologies from your approach. And so they were looking for, they wanted to see that I had done thought or applied some thought to approaching this particular methodology. Why did I get here? How did I get here?
And theoretically, you can always use a table or something like that where you can show different methodologies, and at the end, for different studies or similar studies, and then actually kind of justify with that such a table and kind of literature review on methodology as well, what you have finally selected as the most appropriate one. Yeah, you can show, it's all, I mean, from my perspective, it's always good that you show that you have knowledge, or that you have, an overview over different things, and then it was totally clear and why you have selected exactly one methodology. That definitely helps.
Okay, right. Okay.
Okay, Aloma, I mean, you have just started to talk, warming up. So maybe the question for you, but now you have to perform, okay? The other ones have already performed. They can now just enjoy this session. But for you, kind of, how confident are you in your findings?
I find my findings are useful in terms of a specific AR lens, and my recommendations have helped to improve the organization and leadership challenges of the organization I worked with, and it framed the work-based problems, and I managed to change the perception of the organization and the actors with whom I have been working in developing my research.
Yeah, but you have not kind of answered my question. The question was how confident, or why are you confident in your data?
I'm confident of my findings because it has helped to improve the organizational leadership challenges of the organization. And I can, at the time of completing the research, I saw a significant number of improvements, and it has brought a lot of changes to the organization.
In a way, you are talking about the implementation, not about the data that you kind of assured your data quality.
So are they referring to data here?
I mean, to findings. That's kind of a similar thing. Your findings are based on your data.
Let me jump in, Aloma. What you've been presenting in this response is rather the outcome of the study with regards to what it contributes. Or let's think a bit different about it. Let's call it R&D. You presented the D, the development, but not the R, the research. What did your study find? What was the data showing with regards to the problem, which afterwards allowed you to fix the problem?
Okay, the research part showed that the outside, regarding to the problem I faced, that outside causes were not having a significant impact relating to the macroeconomic conditions were common across all the industries operating under challenging economy, and were not having a significant impact on organizations' profit and revenue losses. And that outside causes prevented exploring possible internal causes that were the biggest causes for the organization's revenue losses. And they were relating to the problems within the organization and the leadership.
Right.
So in doing so, I employed some frameworks.
And how have you uncovered those inside causes in the organization, and how confident are you about this being really the causes that are the root of the problem?
I incorporated 4 frameworks developed by other researchers in finding the results relating, in uncovering the findings.
Okay, and those 4 frameworks, how are you sure that you applied them as earlier studies applied them? Or how do they, in conjunction, assure that the data are robust?
I couldn't get your question.
Those 4 frameworks that you have been applying in conjunction, how certain are you that they worked out well, and that the data that you collected is robust and precise?
One reason is I developed my research framework informed by the literature review, and these frameworks help me to understand, analyze, and design measures to investigate my problem. And higher number of citations also justified how other researchers have benefited from using these frameworks. And these, I paid critical attention to the key arguments and the author credibility.
Okay, I think what is important, just as explanation now, what is important in the Viva is always to see and check what are the examiners looking for. Do they look for information about how have you approached the problem? So basically the core part of the research, the R, or are they looking for the D part, the development or impact? What are the outcomes of your study and what can be done with that knowledge? And perhaps you want to ask them, if required, if you're unsure exactly in that way, are you looking more for the research part or for the outcomes of the study and what could be done with that? I think that would put you on the safe side, because like that you can answer much more precise. Boštjan, back to you.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I mean, this question can be asked. This question can be answered in a few ways. I agree with that. Depends in which direction you go. I mean, I would see it here really how your findings are supported through the methodology in a way. You know, that's how I would see it, but could be seen in a different way as well.
In this regard, it would be important to understand how those frameworks have been derived from related studies.
Exactly.
I understand that Aloma's study also was a sequential study. Therefore, each framework was applied at a specific part in the research for a specific purpose, and only in conjunction you get a clear understanding how things relate. And this type of background information obviously is something, Aloma, that you should provide to the examiners in a brief way, and perhaps as much as Jim did, breaking down answers so that each sentence in itself is already providing some information like, look, I used 4 frameworks, point. Framework 1 I used for this purpose and motivation, drawing on this, and then again break it down. And then obviously also asking control questions, like if the examiners are happy with that answer, or if they would want to also learn about the second, the third, the fourth framework. So to provide choices and options and to allow for dialogue to emerge.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? If not, let us.
I have one question, and
sure.
This is to do with how confident you are. If you know there are weaknesses, I mean, for example, for me personally, I feel that you could only be truly confident in my research findings if you repeated the study and to see if you find the same impacts, or if you try to falsify the findings. And so things that I actually haven't done. Now, okay, in my proposal for future research, I have talked about, you know, repeating and like doing part of the future research could be in that area. But is it unwise to mention anything that undermines being confident in the research findings? Like, should I not mention any of those things?
I mean, my comment is I would not start with that.
Oh, not, I know, I wouldn't start.
What I would not start with that, but what you could mention, that's why I see it rather from the methodology perspective, because in case you choose the proper methodology, in case you follow it, actually you execute it, then it gives you actually results which should be kind of, yeah, finally okay. That's the idea behind it. But if you would have maybe another method which would be able to be used, that you could mention as well. Theoretically, that would show that you have thought, but finally you have taken a decision to use one method, but theoretically with another one or something like that, you know. Yeah. Or you, as you said, your future research, you could say actually another way to show that it's really actually kind of, yeah, that I'm confident in my results is that we would use another method, but that was not the scope, or it was out of the scope or whatsoever. Something like that, just to show that you understand how you can assure that. Yeah. But don't open questions. The committee has questions enough.
Yeah.
In the warehouse. Don't worry about that. Okay. Don't try to seduce them to additional ones.
Okay.
Okay. Carrie, are you still with us?
Yes, hello.
Okay, thank you. So the next question would be kind of for you. How have your methods worked out in practice?
So I used pre-test interviews, focus group, and meeting observation. And that formula of those methods have completely influenced how I conduct business now within my own consultancy. And the reason that it's worked out so well and so transferable is the missing piece that I didn't do previously to my research was I would influence stakeholder alignment by just working through a general meeting, and by actually using my thesis was focused on the role of culture, the role of an individual's culture, and how does that trigger the barriers of stereotypes, biases, and diverse in a diverse communication setting, and pulling out in each individual participant individually for a short 30-minute interview, and then putting them into like small groups instead of doing big groups for people that have English as a second language. And the context of my study was with 18 different European countries. So it was very instrumental in how they reached decisions, overcoming misunderstandings of terms and that process. And because I continue my work in diverse stakeholder groups, utilizing a cultural intelligence framework, it's the companies that I've continued to use this with have experienced great results.
Okay, thanks. Additional question, after finishing your research, would you use another method?
I haven't used another method.
No,
per
but
se.
would you, in case you would do it actually next time? Or would you go actually the same way?
No, I would do the same. I would do the same way. The only thing I would have preferred to do, which I ran out of time, was to continue to close out the process with a follow-up individual interview, where this was left after the main meeting observation and the main group, and we had, got to the point of synergy and the outcome. But I would have liked to have gone back to really seeing the before and after of the from an individual perspective.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
No, not from my side on this.
Okay.
Except that obviously once you would be in a Viva, you won't be able to tell how that changed your business, or perhaps you wouldn't want to focus on other things than discussing your research in the Viva context.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
Okay, back to you, Jim. How are your findings actionable?
So may I ask a clarifying question? So in terms of being actionable, would you prefer to explore how some initial findings were applied in the action research cycle, or are you most interested in how they're actionable outside of the study?
The second.
Okay. Yeah, so the main finding that I was able to, as you see in the write-up, able to come up with through the research was a conceptualization of the sales engineer role. And so what you're seeing is really the first complete conceptualization of the way that sales engineers perform this very technicized role in B2B selling. And so one of the ways that this is actionable is really to offer a mirror to existing or practicing sales engineers and their managers around some of the very role-specific areas of knowledge, skill, behavior, and outcomes that role should ideally reflect based on the findings of the research. This also, from a perspective of the manager, can serve as a roadmap for development of current and future sales engineers and potentially educators as well, to identify and develop and retain talented sales engineers. And one of the key problems that I was addressing as a part of the study was this difficulty of finding, hiring, retaining, developing sales engineers over time. And so this conceptual framework really allows managers to have a practical tool to put in place and orient them toward how to maintain a successful sales engineering organization. And then down at the individual level to focus on those knowledge, skill, behavior, and outcome areas that are identified in the conceptual framework.
Okay, thank you. Have you already received any feedback during your action research cycle on your results?
From participants?
Yes.
Yes. So I had 18 participants who were engaged with me in the study. And the way I engaged them through the action research cycle was in the form of coaching and learning interventions. And so they were applying the sorts of findings that we were uncovering through the study. And that actually created a feedback loop back into the study. So effectively, the participants were benefiting from the early findings in the study, their actions and our actions together in applying those findings essentially created more data and either validated or invalidated the things that we were coming up with. And at the end of that cycle, that was a key part of creating the conceptualized framework.
Okay, thank you.
And we also had a number of managers who were involved in that as well. So they were able to provide a different perspective. And
they saw benefit in it.
They did. In fact, one of the recommendations that you'll notice in the write-up is to actually turn this into a curriculum. That was something that was a request of one of the managers, is to turn this into a teachable curriculum so that it could be replicated with other teams. So that's a potential action that could be taken.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I have a question for Jim in this regard.
Sure.
Can I raise it first?
Sure.
Right,
Just go ahead.
Jim used a word called validating data. If I'm right, action research is a qualitative approach. Can you validate data in a qualitative study?
Well, certainly it was based on the way that the participants experienced the sort of actions that I was asking them to take. So it was essentially things like, did this work or not? How did this work? I was very interested in their experience and the qualitative nature of their experience. So I wasn't trying to do any statistical validation. I was really looking for them to provide feedback back into the process in terms of their experience, the outcomes that they were able to achieve or not as a result of applying some sort of approach.
Happy with the answer?
Yes, I'm fine.
Okay, but there are other methods to validate the qualitative data as well, but that's a bit too out of the scope right now. So you can read about that, definitely. Andreas, you want to say something?
Yeah, the use of some words might be watched out. I mean, what I found very good in Jim's response is exactly what Aloma spotted and what in this case backfired. Now, what Jim as a communicator is doing, what Jim as a communicator is doing very well, he avoids empty words, filling words. He's consistently using key terms, such in this case, knowledge, skills, behavior, which was always being brought back. So I clearly could follow the logics. Very specific, as you will find in the conclusion. So it is really optimum communication, but obviously if you are communicating at such a high level, small mistakes like validation will be easily noted. So yeah.
No, because once I used this word and I was asked this question.
Yeah, and it calls for a question, for a clarification question.
And they said you can't have a validation in a quantitative, it must be a quantitative aspect. So yeah. I remember that very well, yes. So, and it was you, Andreas.
Yeah, so watch what you say. And if you're called on it, then exactly discuss it through and admit mistakes and offer what to do against that, mitigation possibilities, or what to change in the thesis. Back to you, Boštjan.
Okay. We are slowly running out of time. So maybe I would ask now within 2 minutes, okay? The answers within 2 minutes. Vijay, what would you have improved? What would have improved your research work? Make it more robust, make it.
What would have improved my research work would have been cross-implementation of my action research cycles. I had restricted my research to just the head office of the manufacturing unit, but if I had done a vertical implementation across the branches of the organization, my data would have been more robust. And I followed the mixed methodology approach. One of the feedbacks that I did get from my Viva was that I had used, within mixed methodology, I had multiple tools. So restriction of the tools to a maximum of 2 or 3, and a little bit more of a wider approach as far as implementation and coverage would have made my research more meaningful.
Have you included that into the future research or limitations?
In my, yes, I have. I have included that in my limitations, yes. And even in the scope for further research, I've included that there. So based on the modifications, my initial thesis was submitted as 1 action research cycle, but based on the Viva, it got developed into 3 action research cycles.
Okay.
Yeah, I have the same problem.
Thank you.
So did you actually get this question, or did you actually get this question at the Viva, or is it a question by you?
No, the question did come up in the Viva about future implementation and even about, how would you improve your, as far as my methodology is concerned, I was very confident that I was on the right approach. The use of mixed methodology was important. I used both quantitative and qualitative tools. And even for my revision, they all are the same, except that I removed case studies as a tool, and my focus groups were converted into group discussions, just to make it more adaptable for a reader to go through and understand what the process was. And they wanted more in relation to my, in relation to what I had done within the cycles, rather than focus on what was focused at.
I will cut. Okay, thank you. 1 minute, Kerry. How have you changed as a result of taking on this project?
Kerry, you're still muted.
Kerry, you're muted.
And and thank you. That was everything. No, just kidding. Okay, so how did I change? So through my research project, I actually discovered that when we go from a consulting perspective of what is the solution to actually focusing on what is the problem and letting that unfold and be open to possibilities, and also to understand that how I perceive others and my own biases that come out in the research process, and how to check those out while I'm doing my own data collection and not imposing my own stereotypes, biases, and judgments on the participants and others within my research context.
Okay, thank you. Any comment on that?
No, fine.
Okay, and the last question goes then to Aloma. That's another prep question. If you would have started this study again, what would you do differently?
Okay, in my current thesis, I set the participant selection criteria, not wanting to merge the less authoritative level people with high authority people, fearing that they might get withdrawn. But if I get a second chance or another chance, I will not get set criteria. All I wanted is collect as much as information I could that could improve my findings. It's the level of information. What matters is information, not the level of authority that supports my findings. This is the change I will do.
Okay. Think a little bit more about it, okay? That might be a question which you will probably, I wouldn't say that you will get it, but that's another classical question. So go a little bit deeper into that. Okay, you got it, okay. So were they happy with that answer?
No, I didn't answer that.
Okay, understand.
So should I improve this answer?
I would go a little bit deeper, yeah, maybe let us talk about it actually a little bit later on.
Okay.
So let us maybe connect this last question for the three who have already finished your Viva. The same question to all three of you. What would you change or do in a different way during your preparation for the Viva? Ladies first, maybe Viji, and then Kerry, and then Jim. After experienced it, finished it positively, what would you have done in a different way? In the preparation, just in the preparation.
Oh, in the preparation for the Viva, what would you have
Yes.
done differently in the preparation for Viva? No, I pretty much covered everything that I could have done. Mock Vivas, preparation, note-taking, reviewing. I think I did everything that I did need to do when I was preparing for the Viva. With my doctoral tutor, yes. Nothing comes to mind. I'm sorry. Yeah, nothing else comes to mind.
Okay, okay, that's good. Carrie?
Yeah, I agree with Fiji. I wouldn't change anything about how it went.
This is the answer I gave, but they were not happy. What Carrie gave, right?
What about you, Jim?
Yeah, there's a lot of things I would change pre-preparation, but the preparation itself, I'm trying to come up with something that I would change. Going through the 8-week process with you, I don't know that I would change anything there. Maybe the one thing that I would change is, because I was in a unique position, I hadn't submitted my write-up yet while I was going through the preparation process. So maybe I would have just given myself a little more time in between the time I finished preparation and the time I actually submitted, because I felt like I had a deadline that I had set for myself, and I felt like I had a mad rush there at the end. And so that would be the only thing that I would change, to give myself a little more time between the finish of the prep and the mock Viva and the actual submission of the document.
Was that because we were discussing a lot about improving the thesis?
Well, yes, it was actually a good thing, because there was so much. I mean, in addition to the preparation for the live Viva itself, one of the key things that I took away is every week there were things that I needed to go and do to strengthen the write-up. I mean, things that are obvious to me now, but I did not see because I was sort of blind to it. I had spent so much time in the work and in the write-up, I just didn't see certain things, and we were able to uncover that. So I had a lot of work to do between the end of the prep and the submission of the document. So yeah, that's on me.
Okay, thank you. So
I have a question.
Sure.
I have a question.
Sure,
I'm just trying to understand what Jim said, and just for clarification, Jim, did you say that you did some preparation for the Viva even before you submitted your thesis, the final draft? Is that what you meant?
Yes, it was a very fortunate situation. I did not plan it this way. I was very fortunate, but I would highly recommend that if you're in a position where you can do this, time when you submit that document where you say, I have an intention to submit, time your preparation just around that time, because you're essentially in limbo there. You haven't submitted your final version of the thesis. So your preparation actually becomes work that you're doing not just for the Viva, but a test of the strength of your write-up. And you have time to make changes before you do the final submission. So I got lucky, I think, in that instance. I was very fortunate that was the timing for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Audience, do we have any additional questions?
Yes, I have one question.
Sure.
Okay. What is the connection or relationship? Can we combine this? What Viji's question and my question? What would have improved your research work? And if my question, if you started this study again, what would you do differently? Because I was thinking of preparing differently to what would have improved your research work. Can that be aligned?
It depends. You can see it actually similar, but it's not probably totally similar. In this improved, I would probably go into the methodology. I would go probably into the sample size. I would go probably into different methods. But if you start with the study again, it can go actually in every single, let's say, area and chapter of your thesis. That's how I see it actually, or even how you would start, you know, the beginning, how you would frame everything, how you would actually start with the research questions and things like that. So, or even shorter time, smaller sample, more countries. I don't know what you have done, more organizations, things like that.
So which one you're answering? If you study again, or what you'd have improved? Which question you're answering, Boštjan?
As I said, the first one, what would have improved your research work, goes rather things linked to the methodology, sample size, and things like that. Okay, additional, maybe mixed methodology. Maybe some of you have done qualitative, quantitative would actually strengthen that. Maybe more interviews, maybe another focus group and things like that. That's what I would actually expect to be answered here. But the last question, you can go in any direction you want to. Everything what has not kind of, went well, everything what was bothering you, everything where you had any issues and things like that. Even with the starting, I mean, I don't know, if I ask VG, probably I would get the answer, 5 research questions are too many, for example. You know, because you can really not probably focus on that properly. I would say that let us do that with 2 research questions, or maybe a little bit broader ones or something like that. I mean, just now from the discussion, I don't know if she agrees with me or not. You know, but even if you say that you have done actually, I don't know, that you haven't started to read enough literature in the beginning, and that was missing afterwards, or you were actually not really knowledgeable about your methodology enough and things like that. So, you know, that would not strengthen probably your work because you have done it finally, but it would ease, it would make it actually more smooth and you would understand more and things like that. So that's the idea behind it. That's what I meant, but maybe somebody else has another comment on that.
Yes, I have one last question. Please help me, people who have gone through the Viva and passed their Vivas. Were any of you asked for writers' names and all?
You mean
I mean, Jim was asked. Jim was asked
writers'
today.
names, say like Potters.
Yes, Jim was asked. I asked that question, Jim, today. I mean, that's an obvious question. I mean, you should know that, and you do know that.
And based on the preparation, I just went ahead and volunteered that in the Viva, so I didn't wait to be asked. Although they did ask what in one question in my Viva, they did ask, why didn't you use this individual, or why didn't you reference this body of work? And so that was a bit challenging, but we were able to talk through that. And fortunately, I had an answer.
You did answer.
In my case,
I did. I was able to answer because I had read that, but I had not gone down that path.
In my case, Paloma, the authors came up when I was talking about the conceptual framework, mainly to relate to the elements. And that's pretty much where it came up. And of course, I did mention some authors when I was talking about action research and the cycles, which I brought up, you know, based on my notes that I had taken. But I did make a list of key papers that I had reviewed, especially in the development of my questionnaire and my literature review.
Okay, thank you. So, Douglas, Dermot, any additional questions?
Shall we give some space now for off the record questioning?
Okay, sure. Let us do that.